how successful or effective are drugs like MDMA and psilocybin, specifically speaking to those two because they're the ones that the TGA sort of rescheduled. But how effective are they for people who are deemed to have treatment-resistant depression or PTSD?
The short answer is we don't know, because there's a number of problems running clinical trials with these drugs, and consequently we're seeing inflated or exaggerated benefits at the moment. Some of these problems are not being able to blind people. So normally when you participate in a randomized controlled trial, you're either allocated to a placebo group or the active group. If you're in the placebo, well, it doesn't matter what condition you're in. If you are administered MDMA in a clinical setting, within about half an hour, you're going to know which condition you've been allocated to, and so are the therapists and everybody else involved in the study. So you can't blind people to what they are receiving, and this is a problem that we haven't really overcome in research yet. The rates of blinding are not good. So when they do actually measure whether or not people can correctly guess what condition they are in, it's about 97, 98% of people guess the correct condition because it's pretty obvious. And the reason this is a problem for estimating the effectiveness of the treatment is because there's so much positive information out there about these treatments. People are coming in with a lot of hope and a lot of expectation. And so if they are put in the psilocybin or the MDMA condition, fantastic. But given the nature of the placebo effect, if they expect this is going to be a very effective treatment, then it's going to impact the effectiveness of the treatment. In the same way, if you give someone a sugar pill and tell them it'll stop their back pain, it will stop some of their back pain. And then if you're in the control condition and you think this is the end of the road, this is your last chance to recover from your mental health condition, and you realize you're in the control group and you're not going to get the treatment, well, that's going to mean that your symptoms are going to get worse. And so you end up with the people in the control group, ending up reporting worse symptoms, people in the intervention group reporting even better symptoms than we would expect, creating a bigger divide. And inflation of the effect size is technically what it's called. I was thinking at one point when we were talking about the underground practitioners and what's going on there, and you sort of summarized it saying there was, that you need both ends. You need everything in here. For me, that sits really well with me because, as somebody that's against prohibition and, pro decriminalization and other ways of dealing with the drug issue, I don't have a problem if folks in the community want to go out and take a psychedelic drug or take any drug for that matter, provided they're not harming anybody else. That's fine. That's essentially, it's called cognitive liberty, being able to, think and change your mindset in any way you wish. But this gets a lot more complex when we add in mental health, because the way in which these drugs work, they're experimental treatments at best at the moment. And so doing that in an unregulated environment outside of a clinical trial means that there's less control. And ultimately, if things do go pear-shaped, the person has got nowhere to report that to. You can't ring up AHPRA, who regulates all of the healthcare professionals, and say, this shaman needs to be deregistered. And I think the local Australian psychedelic community is really working hard at the moment to try to create a sort of self-regulation system so that there's support systems in place for people accessing these services, and they're able to report back, and there's sort of a community-based feedback loop to try to stamp out some of the problematic practices and practitioners that are out there at the moment. But yeah, it creates a quandary for me, because on one hand, I think anybody should be able to do what they want when it comes to a drug. The drug shouldn't be made illegal. Yet on the other hand, once we insert mental health and call these mental health treatments, then the whole situation gets a whole lot more complex.
Hey friends, are you ready to take your fermented food game and gut health to the next level? look no further than my digital guide, Plant-Based Ferments. Inside, you'll discover some of my favorite recipes, including my soy labneh and homemade kombucha. Visit theproof.com/ferments for more details. That's theproof.com/ferments. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's get back to the episode. So it's difficult for us to quantify how effective these drugs are. Seem to be effective at some level, but you mentioned there it's hard to kind of tease out the placebo effect from the effect of the drug itself. How is it thought that these drugs, MDMA, psilocybin, are influencing physiology and leading to some type of benefit?
So MDMA is not a classic psychedelic. In fact, I wouldn't call it a psychedelic full stop. We talked about entheogen. One of the terms that I like that's not particularly popular in the mainstream is entactogen for MDMA. It's something that it's an empathogen, an entactogen. It creates empathy, but it's very different both in its subjective effect and also the way it works on the brain, very different to classic psychedelics. So classic psychedelics, including psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, dimethyltryptamine, I'll stop there but could keep going on. All of the classical psychedelics primarily work at a serotonin receptor site called the 2A receptor, and it's thought that many of the effects are due to the binding at that site, and it's probably a bit more complex than that because there's the odd 5-HT2A receptor agonist that doesn't produce a psychedelic effect. And there's research underway at the moment to create non-psychedelic psychedelics. So these are drugs that work the same way in the brain but don't actually produce the psychedelic experience, because understandably that could be a promising treatment. Many people, even who are desperate for relief, will be unwilling to go through the psychedelic experience because it's very unpredictable, that you can experience heaven and hell all within the same 5 minutes, and that can be quite uncomfortable. So the idea of having a non-psychedelic psychedelic treatment, I can see why that's appealing. Personally, I'm not sure it'll work, but that's currently under investigation. Not sure whether human trials have started with any of those new chemicals yet. And at a broader systems level, what the classic psychedelics are doing, possibly through that agonism of the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor site, is turning or dialing down the default mode network. So the default mode network is it's basically interconnected parts of the brain, and it's the default mode network. It's a bit like a brain conductor. We have multiple networks that are similar to this that are like conductors of the brain. And so it keeps everything sort of in sync, all of the different parts of the brain that it connects up with. And if you turn off the default mode network, then it creates a cacophony of noise because the systems aren't all in sync anymore. And it's hypothesized that the noise that's created by that dialing down of the conductor results in people being able to perceive themselves and their situation very differently. Like it allows them to think outside of very rigid beliefs that they might have, say with somebody with depression or a body dysmorphic disorder. And it may also explain the mystical experience that people have, sort of that crosstalk that's happening in the brain, whereas MDMA doesn't operate on that receptor site at all. It tends to dial down the limbic system, which is the part of the brain associated with fear response and other emotions. It allows people to sit with unpleasant emotions that they might not typically be able to sit with and explore those, which for somebody with PTSD, they may not have ever been able to talk about the trauma. So they can't do talk therapy if they can't talk about the trauma. MDMA helps people work in what's called a window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is not being hyper-aroused and being overwhelmed, but not being able to use your masking response either and being forced to experience the emotion as well. So they're able to experience it in a way that allows them to basically to work through the trauma and process that trauma. And it also, unlike classic psychedelics, MDMA really creates a sense of trust. So, which is really helpful in therapy as well, because we know the best prediction of whether somebody does well in a psychotherapy, it's not what psychotherapy they receive. In fact, it's whether there's a good therapeutic alliance between the clinician and the patient. If you've got a good therapeutic alliance, regardless of what approach you're taking, you're more likely to get a positive outcome. So by enhancing trust through the drug-assisted sessions, that in turn too is likely to enhance the therapeutic alliance and result in some of the clinical outcomes as well, be responsible for.
That's very well explained. I've heard stories of people hallucinating like they're on DMT during a deep meditation or during specific breath work. Is it possible that we can tap into these kind of same benefits that psychedelic medicines like psilocybin may provide through deep meditation or specific breath work like holotropic breath work, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. In the 60s, when, or maybe even earlier, the late 50s, particularly when philosophers like Aldous Huxley were starting to experiment with mescaline, some of the naysayers said that it was a shortcut. Essentially, people that are doing the work with various meditation or other contemplative practices like yoga, they're climbing the mountain the old school way. It's hard work, and when they get to the top of the mountain, they appreciate the view because they've done the work to get there. Psychedelics are essentially a helicopter ride to the top. You get to see what's up there, and then you drop back to the bottom again. Now, I like this analogy, not so much because I'm a naysayer, but I think a lot of people struggle to engage in those contemplative practices for long enough to ever get to the top of the mountain. And so I think being able to get a snapshot of what it looks like up there may provide encouragement to continue to engage in those contemplative practices and get the benefits from that.
Is there something at all to be said? And I'm not sure where I sit on this. I kind of haven't really made up my mind and I don't know enough about it. That's why I'm asking you. But is there something to be said about gaining mastery through years and decades of mindfulness where you slowly learn about yourself and have time to kind of come to terms with parts of yourself and the world, where the mind has enough time to kind of adjust and mature versus just being thrown into this acute situation where you're sort of bombarded with a whole lot of new ideas and thoughts in a fraction of the time?
Yeah, yeah. And I think ultimately, we need to ensure as we move forward, rolling these out as treatments, that these things are being paired together. I think they go together quite well. And I think the practice and the discipline and dedication that comes with these contemplative practices is useful for people having a psychedelic experience. Like, doing that work beforehand is going to make the journey a little bit easier. I guess what I was saying with the mountain is, some people get frustrated with the progress that they're making, and I think that's where psychedelics can augment the progress by just giving them a snapshot of what they could achieve if they continue to engage in these practices. But there's a lot of similarity between deep meditative states and a psychedelic experience.